Well, it's an honour and a pleasure to meet you two fellows. I've been wanting to do this interview for a while. I went out and bought all these CDs and listened to them and watched the DVD, and what a story.
It's a pretty long one.
Yeah, and there's a book now, and I'd like to talk about that in a little bit, but you're on a national tour.
Yeah, we're on tour at the moment. We just started last week, and tomorrow night at the Enmore Theatre.
I'll be there.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's a great place to play. Look, our life in the Angels is wonderful. Dave Gleason's been with us for getting up to 7 years now, and my son Sam plays the bass, and Nick Norton's on the drum, who's amazing. We just have the best time. And, we're doing lots of great things. It's an ongoing story. It's not, the book doesn't sort of define the whole thing, it's just part of the journey.
Yeah, surely.
So this tour is pretty much, it's really supporting the book, and takes us through till December. Take a bit of a break over Christmas and start again next year with a whole lot of Red Hot Summer shows we're doing with Susie Quattro.
The Animals.
Yeah.
Dave's going to be singing in two bands. It's
Screen
okay. You can do that these days.
Yeah. Well, whereas once you would have had too much work to have...
No, you couldn't have done it in the old days.
Yeah. Leading up to this week, I've been mentioning to people we're going to do the interview, and just about everyone said to me, "Oh, the Angels, they were my favourite live band to go and see." So many people said that to me. I'm interested. What makes a great live band?
Yeah, well, I guess back in the late 70s we found our sound. I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons. We became friends with AC/DC in 1975, and though Angus and Malcolm and Bon took some sort of shining to us, they saw something in us that we weren't sure what they'd seen at the time, because we were still learning the ropes. But they went back to Sydney and introduced Harry Vander and George Young to us. And that was really the whole start of the evolution that ended up sort of giving birth to the Face to Face album. Where we were just trying to find our sound. We were quite influenced by AC/DC, not in terms of sounding like them, but just their attitude. Their attitude was unbelievable. They were going to conquer the world. I remember sitting with Bon Scott in a bus in Port Augusta, of all places. And Bon was pretty self-effacing, but he said to me, we're going to be going overseas and we're going to be one of the biggest bands in the world. And I didn't disagree, because the first time I saw them, it just blew me away. And he said to me, "And you know why?" And I said, "Well, yeah, because you're a great band." He said, "No, it's because we got Angus." And I said, yeah, but they also got you, Bon, because Bon was amazing.
Did you know him previously? Because he was from Adelaide.
Kind of. Just not well, but I knew him a little bit because he was singing in Fraternity, and they were an amazing band. And he used to do Seasons of Change, playing the flute. Yeah. And then next thing you know, he's up there doing TNT and stuff. And
that's where I actually saw. What was it? TD? Was it? Yeah, I saw him on Channel 2 when I was only a little fella. Yeah.
But I mean, Bon was just amazing, but that whole thing about us, and just coming up with our own angle, our own sound. It took a while to develop it. It sort of came together in the Face to Face album.
Yes. Well, it's certainly there. I mean, listening to you, you're certainly of a genre, but you don't sound like anybody. It certainly is an Angel sound, isn't it?
Well, we always said we want people to copy us. We don't want to copy anyone.
Yeah. And yet, of course, influences are in all good bands. I think you hear the the Beatles, you hear the Everly Brothers,
Yes.
In the Rolling Stones, you hear Muddy Waters.
Yes.
And in David Bowie, you hear the Beatles.
Yeah. Well, who were the big influences on you?
Well, for me, it started out classical for me, because I was learning classical piano. So when it came to rock and roll, I didn't know anything about it, really. So I listened to quite a bit of AC/DC. So Angus was a big influence when I started playing lead guitar. and then it was Eric Clapton and a bit of Hendrix and all of those. They gradually came into the picture, but I started out really from the classical side, wanting to write solos that were melodic, that you could sing.
You know, I've worked out a few of your solos, and they do spell out the chords. It's not just like a blues scale that, you know, that a lot of the fellows from that period would have done, you know, just use the pentatonic scale. But you move with the change and with the chord change.
I didn't know what a pentatonic scale was, so I still don't really know. But
I still don't.
I've got a book you can go through, mate.
I never had time for guitar lessons because we went straight to going on the road. And
Unbelievable.
No time for lessons, so I threw myself in the deep end. I just had to write solos in my head and work out how to play them.
I remember Rick and I used to hang out in the studio all night. We'd do a gig, maybe the Bondi Lifesaver or something or other, and we'd go to Albert's studios because we had a key. You had to go up there, open the thing, go in, up to the studio, and we'd stay all night there recording. Just the two of us, you know. We'd have the beds, you know, the rhythm tracks and everything. And I'm pretty sure it was one of those nights that we actually sang the Take a Long Line guitar solo. And, you know, I played some chords and we sang this da 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 da, and Rick came up with a fantastic solo, and we used to love doing stuff like that. There's probably some of the classical influence, particularly with Rick, in you know, because our family were full of classical musicians. I was kind of the only one that wasn't. But you asked a question about why we were such a good band live. There's so many factors, but I think one of them is that everything that we ever did, we did in front of people. You know, you'd write a song, you'd put it in the show that night. You soon knew which songs were working and which weren't. Plus, as we started to develop songs like I Ain't the One and Take a Long Line and Marseille and Straight Jacket and Coming Down on Me, you know, all those songs, you know, it was pretty intense stuff. And Doc went and visited his Professor Wal Cherry at Flinders University in Adelaide, and Doc had studied drama there and got his degree. I also studied drama, filmmaking mainly for me, at that university, which was amazing in those days. And Doc had this chat with Wal Cherry because we sort of discovered the theatre of expressionism, Bertolt Brecht in particular. And what happened is that Doc went to see Wal Cherry and he said, you know, I want to put some of those concepts into what I do on stage. And he had some suggestions. Doc, of course, then did it his own way, but the suggestions were great. That he came on stage all, you know, with the ascot tie and all this stuff, and then became dishevelled as a performance. And then Doc was just amazing, you know, what he used to do. So it's not because of him, and it's not because of us. And it's one of those things. The band just,
it was a unit.
And for us, it was as exciting as it was for them. When we played live, it was just the most exciting, and still is, I have to say, it still is an incredibly exciting experience to play live.
Well, just watching you two fellas together in a, well, what would you say, a chopped down, what's the term I'm looking for, but...
Chinese restaurant?
Well, Rick and I figured that if we do a circuit of Chinese restaurants, we could be huge. But no, the thing is, what we've done today was we donated our services for charity. Our friend Matt Laverty runs a charity ball every year, and he has an auction, and so people bought us to come in.
Oh, okay. So I see what it was about then. Yeah, but just the two of you, it was fantastic. You know, I had a ball, and the songs. You know, you didn't need the drums and bass even.
Well, that's the thing. You see, we wrote songs like that.
Yeah. All right.
We'd have an acoustic guitar or maybe an electric guitar through a little amp, and that's how we write them, and that's why we can still play them that way.
And they work. Perfectly well.
You know, we're obviously talking to a guitar magazine, and So I play guitar too.
Yes, I noticed that.
But the point I was going to make about my guitar playing is that I only ever played guitar to sing songs,
Right.
because I was so heavily influenced by Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
That was the greatest love, musical love for me of all time. I saw him play in 1966, but I was already there since 1963, I think, was his very first album. So for me, it was all about...
Well, John, watching you do Just Like a Woman was one of the most special things for me to see. That was fantastic. You did a wonderful job. Great feel. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you.
Maybe you can do a Bob Dylan album.
We've done one.
Have you?
Yeah, Rick and I did it with Nick Norton, our drummer in the Angels. We went up to to Mixmaster Studios in Adelaide, which is a great studio, and I think we spent 3 days there, and we just set up a mic for me and my acoustic. Rick played the bass and then did overdubs, wonderful overdubs. And Nick played the drums, and he did some guitar stuff too. He's an amazing guitar player himself. And we did an album of Dylan songs. It turned out really well, actually. It's good to do something different.
Yeah. Tell me about your family. That obviously you've had a couple of generations of musicians.
Well, it really started with our grandfather on our father's side. He was classical composer, pianist, organist,
What was his
conductor. Hooper Brewster Jones.
He was actually christened Brewster. That was his Christian name, but he studied at London College of Music. You can take over from there.
Oh, his name was Jones. When he was
So you're
studying,
Welsh.
when he was in London
Yeah, I think so.
studying, there were a whole lot of Joneses, such a common name. They kept getting each other's mail. It was all surface mail in those days. So they all hyphenated their names
Right.
so they could tell each other apart. Anyway, we never met him. He died before we were born. But his son, our father, was classical cellist and pianist and conductor as well. And so it ran through the blood. John and I grew up surrounded by that classical music. It was always around us. Our father's friends, a lot of them were classical musicians. And so we grew up surrounded by it. I learnt classical piano. John went up to the bedroom, learnt Bob Dylan songs. And eventually I left, put the piano on hold and started playing a bit of guitar. And then we started a jug band. And it all changed radically.
He's a washboard player.
I went to washboard.
Unbelievable. Cymbals was incredible.
I've listened to this album through a lot. Let me put it up to the camera, and those couple of jug band songs that you start with, I was shocked. I just thought, this is the Angels.
That's how it all began, I mean, the jug band was the most fantastic fun. We just did it for fun.
Yeah.
But the thing, it became really successful. Gave us a bit of a taste for it, and we started to write, and we realised that we couldn't be a jug band and write contemporary songs because that music is based in the 1920s. So the whole thing, that's how the whole thing changed, and the rest of it, as they say, is history.
Yeah.
Great thing.
Did your father play professionally?
Yeah.
He was in the orchestra?
Yeah, and then he stopped playing. He was the lead cellist of the Symphony Orchestra. He had his own string orchestra.
Okay.
Arthur Brewster Jones String Orchestra. It was 40-piece.
Right.
But then he became the director of music for the ABC in Adelaide.
Right, okay.
So in those days, the ABC ran the Symphony Orchestra. So Dad was kind of running the Symphony Orchestra, I guess. He was, auditioning people, and I think he played in a string quartet at one stage.
Right.
There's a lot about our Dad that I wish I knew, actually.
Really?
Yes, even though we lived with him, I didn't know enough about him. I think Rick could probably say the same thing, wouldn't he?
Yes, I think.
He was a bit of a quiet sort of fellow.
How did what did he make of your success as you got on with things?
He eventually came around to getting it, but initially he hated it.
Oh, really?
Hated the whole idea.
Oh, well, he was totally into classical music, and he was a great player. And I've got one story about him in the 60s where I thought, I'm going to get him, because the Beatles had just released On the Walrus, and I bought the single, and I went up to Dad and I said, Dad, you've got to hear this because it's got the London Philharmonic Orchestra on it. I thought, oh, this will win him over. So he sat down in those days, the radiogram with a turntable that was down on the bottom deck. So he sat in a low chair, he's got his cigarette in one hand and a glass of scotch, and he puts on the Walrus, and he listened right through it. And then I said, what? And he said, he held his hand up, I wasn't allowed to talk. So he lit up another cigarette, he put it on again, another sip of scotch, listened right through it again, and I still wasn't allowed to talk. Hold on. Goes through the same rigmarole again. 3 times he listened to On the Walrus. I thought, I've got him for sure. He took it off. He was pretty slow, you know. I put it back in the jacket, walked over to me, handed it to me and said, bloody rubbish.
Oh, no.
But close to the last year of his life, he called me one day and he said, son, I've been listening to your music. Well, I nearly fell off my chair. He said, I get it. He said, you've got some great ideas going on there, you know. So we finally I think we might have got him.
But it is, I mean, it's a whole different thing, isn't it? I mean, basically you're about tough guitar sounds, you know. It's a hard rockin' band, and, you know, if you're coming from that...
yeah,
you know.
You can hear those classical influences, you know, that we grew up around these people. Rick in particular, comes through in his playing in particular, but, you know, there were nights here at home when Dad would have some of the seriously world-renowned musicians in the house.
Yeah.
They'd all get drunk and play together. And I remember sitting in an armchair with tears coming down, just listening to their playing.
Yeah.
It was just a fantastic environment.
He had absolutely no concept of rock and roll.
Mm-hmm.
To him, he only knew the classical world.
Yes.
And he knew from his own experience that it was very hard to make a living. He grew up through the Depression. He ended up having 2 jobs.
Yeah.
He started a trucking company. When he got married and started a family, that was when he stopped being a professional musician because there was no money in it. And that was all he could really see. When we started, when we said we're going to be professional musicians, it was get a real job. Get a secure job.
And of course he was right. But the funny thing is,
but wrong.
Right, but wrong. But I mean, he is right. I mean, like it's a tough game. But you know, and the funny thing is that Rick had just got his degree as an agricultural scientist of all things. You know, you know, like he probably had a magnificent career all mapped out for him, I suppose. But the thing is that, you know, we're talking to you 43 years after we started the band, and, you know, tell me, there would be so many people that would have been in so-called secure jobs in 1974 that have probably been retrenched by now, and, you know, so we've had a great life, you know. A roller coaster life, definitely. But
hey, whose idea was it to get Jamie Messenger in to do the string arrangements? When I heard those tunes, boy, you know, it was fantastic.
Isn't he great?
Well,
Rob Pippin.
That was Rob John, who, I mean, Rob Pippin put us onto Rob John, and Rob John put us onto Jamie Messenger.
So you didn't know him, like, from an Adelaide connection?
We'd never met either of those guys, but we went to Melbourne one time and met up with both of them and had a great chat to them, and then Rob did most of the scoring for the songs, and Jamie did about 5 or 6.
He did 4 or 5, yeah.
And they're both just superb.
Yeah.
So it's great that we've got on this one.
Yeah.
We've got half a dozen songs with the Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah.
And we will do it again, actually.
Yeah. I very much enjoyed it. But, you know, it's a terrific album, and, you know, starting with those, 5 jug songs, was it? The first 5, you know.
There's
and then
4, I think. And
4,
then there's some Brewster Brothers songs, which is...
yeah, and you did that "Do It" again today. It's a great song.
Right.
And whose sons played with you? I don't.
John's sons.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. So Harry's a handy guitar player too. Did you teach him?
I feel like Fred McMurray without the pipe, you know.
My three sons.
But they're such good players, and they're very close to Rick. You know, we're all very close, and you know that we do shows with Brewster Brothers shows with those 3 boys. Not always.
Well, they're
sometimes.
Brewster Brothers too.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, well, that's it. It's like the Brewster Brothers with the Brewster Brothers. But they play great, and so they're on this as well. From the show we did at Foxtel Studios. They very kindly invited us in, and we had 100 people, and with a very small theatre, and we did the jug band there as well. Yeah, it's great fun.
Well, I with my Guitar Heroes show, I've recorded a couple of CDs, and I get different bass players and drummers, and then different guitar players to come in and play with me. And I remember the first CD I did. Mel Green produced it for me, and he said, "I'll get a bass player, get a friend in," and he got a fellow called Chris, who I didn't know. He turned out to be Chris Bailey.
Oh,
And what a wonderful fellow, you
the
know.
best.
And I'd like to ask you, each of you, what's your feelings about Chris and you know?
Oh,
your
I was
recollections?
totally in awe of Chris when he joined the band. I was Chris Bailey. You know, he was the lead singer and bass player of Headband, that were
Was he the singer in
an
that?
iconic
Oh, yeah.
Adelaide band, and you know, he was one of those music gods from Adelaide.
Right. Okay,
And when he joined the band, you know, he was probably the best musician of all of us,
really?
and
He's probably the best singer of all of us too.
Including Doc?
Well, yeah. I mean, Doc got there definitely, but at the time that Chris joined the band, you know, Doc hadn't found it. He got
but
there.
he just
Did he ever?
he couldn't get a more self-effacing guy. Never pushed himself forward. He was a real bass player's bass player. Sat back there, played the most beautiful bass lines, and never really pushed to do any more than that. Even though he had a great voice and all the rest of it.
Well, I do know Peter Head. In fact, I'd done a couple of gigs with him, and the funniest thing was I was saying how the first rock concert I went to was the Rolling Stones at Randwick Racecourse, and I said it was 74 or something like that. I can't remember what year I remembered it to have been, and Peter said to me it was 73. And I said, no. And he said it was 73, and I said, how are you so sure? And he said, I did the support. So he played, so he'd know better than me.
Yeah.
But Chris was singing in that band that day, huh?
Yeah.
Hey,
He was in that band.
They were great. I mean, Headband were a great band. And my own story about Chris is that I first met him. I went to St Peter's College, and I was in the cadet corps. It was compulsory to be in cadets, and so we'd have an annual, whatever you call it, with camp, and that was up near Whyalla. And so Chris was a Prince Alfred College boarder, and we're sort of rival schools, and so their tents were just kind of next to our tents. And one night somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, there's a guy in the Prince's tent singing Beatles songs." I went, "Okay." I went in, and there was Chris, and the two of us ended up singing Beatles songs together. So we sort of became friends, but friends that really didn't see a lot of each other. And I'd see Chris every now and again. He was a big fan of the jug band, the Moonshine Jug and String Band, but we didn't really hang out together. That was one experience, and then he joined the band, and the rest is history. But having sat in the studio, in our production role, I guess, behind the mixing desk and sitting there with Chris beside us, just coming up with the stuff for our songs, he just, I used to call him the unsung hero of the Angels, because he, as Rick said earlier, he was very self-effacing, He used to just, he'd say, I just play the low notes, no one can hear them anyway, which is of course complete rubbish. But he would just, he'd add an ingredient to those songs which is, it'll forever stand the test of time. I think the songs do too, but what he contributed was amazing.
Peter Head he taught me how to play rock and roll piano.
Did he?
When we, 74 or 75, whenever we landed the Chuck Berry support.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that.
I was to be the piano player. All I'd ever played was Beethoven and Chopin, whatever. And I panicked, and someone said, Peter Head. I went and saw him. We had a couple of sessions together, and he said, you do this.
What did he show you?
He just showed me how to go down, 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 in every key, which, unlike a guitar, you can do bar chords and it's all the same. On a piano, every key is different. And with Chuck Berry, you don't know what key he's going to play.
No, he just plays it wherever his fingers land.
Yeah.
And so it was crucial that I've had some lessons.
What was that like?
Well, that was prior to Chris Bailey. So, and in fact, I had the easy gig because I was his bass player, and because I started off on bass in the Keystone Angels, and I wasn't allowed to play any bass runs at all. Rick was doing all that, but I wasn't allowed to because I tried it once and Chuck turned around and he went, And I actually figured it out in retrospect because Chuck had the bass 3 strings on the guitar through a bass amp. And the top 3, because he had a stereo 3, 4, 5.
Okay.
The top 3 strings were going through a Fender Twin. Well, I think it was one of those 6-speaker ones,
Right, okay.
They actually looked pretty similar to the bass amp. But so the top 3 strings would go through a guitar amp, the bottom 3 through a bass amp. So he was doing bass runs, even though they were up the octave. He was doing bass runs on those strings while playing the rhythm stuff up there. So if I was starting to play any bass runs, I'd be conflicting with him. So I just thought he was pretty mean, but actually he had a good reason for it.
Yeah. Did you I've heard that he just turns up. You don't rehearse with him, and you've just got to know his songs.
Our first gig was Hordern Pavilion, and I said to I think it was Tony Maroney, the promoter. I said, "Well, when do we get to rehearse with Chuck Berry?" And he said, "You don't rehearse with Chuck Berry, you just play with him." And I went, "What?" And we were really young and green. It was actually 75. Then I think we had either just met AC/DC or we were just about to. I think we met them afterwards. But anyway, so we're standing in front of 7,500 people with not one bar of rehearsal with Chuck Berry. He walks on a stage, he said, "Just watch my left foot." He said, "When I stamp my left foot, we start. And when I stamp my left foot again, we stop." That was it. And off he went. So that went well. It was great.
Yeah, John Young, the Australian bass player, played with him in America. He told me it was a pretty scary gig. Even though they're just 12 bar or commonly used chord progressions, you've just got to know his records.
Yeah, you did. You had to know the records, but also what great records they were. I mean, the guy was fantastic. Actually, he was. You wouldn't want to be promoted hiring him because he was a real pain at that.
Was he?
Oh yeah, he'd hold shows up so they gave him more money, But anyway, all that aside, he was fantastic. The only thing I hated was that My Ding-a-Ling song. I hated that song, but I also loved it because I smoked in those days. And when you start My Ding-a-Ling, there was no one else, just him and the guitar, so I could go out and have a cigarette.
Right. Yeah, can I ask you about Doc? What are your recollections, and since he's gone now, and your thoughts on Doc?
Well, he like we were saying earlier, we met him in the joke band. He was fantastic, loads of fun, great performer. We started the Angels together, and he found his persona in the Angels, which was incredible. And it's like we kind of lost touch with him after a few years. When the band took off, he went into his own world, and a very remote person, very hard to get to know. We we used to see him. I used to see him on stage, and that was it for years and years, for decades. I would go on stage because the band went on first, and Doc would come on. Doc would leave before the band. Never said hello, goodbye.
He just went home or went somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah. And back in the days when we used to travel around in what was my old 1964 EH Holden station wagon, and I did most of the driving, particularly after the one night when we were driving from Melbourne to Sydney, and I was having a sleep in the back seat, and I woke up and Doc was behind the wheel, and it was pouring with rain. He was about 20 feet behind a semi-trailer, and the car was lurching side to side, and it was just unbelievably dangerous. And I looked at the speedo, it was 70 miles an hour, and he's like, feet away from the semi, and he's got this thing on his lap. And I went, Doc, what are you doing? He said, I'm just writing out the lyrics of a Beatles song. And I said, pull over. It's the last time I was ever driven by Doc. But and the other funny thing is, in those days, like we were living and breathing the band. We were out on the road constantly, even though we had personal relationships that, probably was difficult, But that's what we did, In a way, I suppose the band was almost more important than, personal relationships. And to let our hair down, sometimes we'd pull over and we'd get the Frisbee out and we'd throw the Frisbee. That's Chris Bailey, Buzz Bishop, Rick and me. And Doc would always go off somewhere with a book on Shakespeare or something or other and be around the corner out of view of us. But the Frisbee would always find him. He'd go around the corner of a building and it'd hit him on the head, and then he'd be really pissed off. And he'd come back out with a Frisbee like, really angry.
He was sitting sideways on a brick wall that was this high once. He was sitting like this reading, and we were out there on an oval Frisbeeing. We had this whole etiquette happening, apologies, great frizz, John, and all this stuff going on. And this Frisbee...
We weren't smoking drugs or anything.
This Frisbee went wild, and we watched it. Doc's there, reading studiously. And he just went sideways.
What did he say?
He was furious, red in the face.
He never saw the funny side of those two things. He'd always get really angry, and we'd be rolling around the ground laughing.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's actually quite nice to talk about Doc and remember some of the funny things that sort of weren't funny either. He developed this thing where he insisted wouldn't matter. We could be staying at the Hilton Hotel, and he would insist that they put a bedboard between the mattress and the base. So, like for some crazy reason, they all had to do it. And, Brent Eccles had sent out wasn't an email then, it was a fax with Doc's demands. Anyway, we're playing, I think it was up in Gladstone in Queensland, and we'd just checked into the motel. And the motel owner, who was very proud of his brand new Posturepedic beds, went, oh, that's got to be a spelling mistake. So he put, in Doc's room, he put a breadboard.
And a bread knife.
With a knife. And, which was just hilarious. And, we thought, oh, Doc's got to see the funny side of this. But no, he didn't. He went and dressed him down. And the motel owner and his wife had to go down to the hardware store. And there was two of them walking back to the hardware store with this door. They'd bought a door. And our tour manager, Ian Taylor, was given the job of inserting that door between the mattress and the base, and he was so pissed off he kept bouncing up and down on the thing, swearing. At one stage he hit the door and it went doing and hit his head on the ceiling.
Yeah, he certainly had a reputation, didn't he, the old Doc?
Yeah. Look, as I was just saying that about when you think about Doc, I like to think about all the good times, because we had great times with Doc. We also had some really difficult times with Doc, but we've had difficult times with each other,
Well, brothers.
Well, yeah, brothers, and that was an issue. Actually, was an issue. An argument about how a song went would turn personal, and that didn't happen with Doc. But I think when I look back on the whole history, I think the happiest I've probably ever seen Doc was in the Moonshine Jug and String Band, because the band was fun, and we did funny things.